The gun was real. She was zip-tied to a chair. Bruise forming on her cheekbone, hands pulled behind her back. 17 years old and completely still. The kind of still that comes after you've already decided you're not going to fall apart behind her. A man in a $1,000 suit stood in the middle of everything he'd built and everything he'd destroyed and held the gun like it was the only argument he had left. Outside this room, somewhere in a server no one could reach in time, data was transmitting. A dead man's switch set 3 years ago by a father who knew exactly what was coming. The door opened, and the man with the gun looked up, and for one long second, nobody moved, because what walked through that door wasn't law enforcement, wasn't a negotiator, wasn't anyone with authority or backup or a plan that went beyond right now, just a mechanic from Atlanta and a mother who'd run out of ways to stay safe. The alarm didn't wake him. Devin Holloway was already up, already in the garage, already halfway through his second cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago because he forgot to drink it. That was his life now. Cold coffee, empty chairs, a 9-year-old boy sleeping upstairs who looked more like his mother every single day. He set the mug down on the workbench, picked up a wrench, put it back, picked it up again, not because anything needed fixing, just because his hands didn't know what to do with themselves before 6 in the morning, when the world was still quiet, and the quiet was the worst part. 3 years since Renee, 3 years, and he still reached for her side of the bed sometimes. Half asleep, not thinking, then he'd remember, and the remembering was its own kind of injury, the kind that didn't bleed, just ached. He walked to the refrigerator. On the door, held by a magnet shaped like a football helmet, was a piece of notebook paper, handwriting in red marker, big letters. Slightly uneven because Isaiah pressed too hard when he was excited. Math team today, 3 circles around it. 3. Because once wasn't enough for a 9-year-old who needed the whole world to understand the significance of the occasion. Devin stood there, looking at it longer than he meant to. Renee would have made pancakes. The kind with blueberries. She would have written a note in Isaiah's lunch bag. Something embarrassing that Isaiah would pretend to hate and secretly love. She would have done all of it before 6 in the morning without being asked. He made a mental note to pick up blueberries. Then he went back to the garage and tried not to think about how quiet the apartment was. He had work to do. Mrs. Patterson's Volvo was due in at 8 for its weekly tire pressure check. That never actually needed doing, but gave the elderly woman a reason to leave her house and talk to someone for 20 minutes. He had a brake job after that. Then an oil change. Then whatever walked through the door. That was Monday, same as every Monday, except at 6:42 in the morning, while he was organizing his socket set in the particular way that settled his mind when nothing else would, his phone rang, unknown number. Atlanta area code. He almost let it go. His thumb hovered. Then something in him, the restlessness of a man who hadn't slept more than 5 hours and had been awake with his thoughts since 4:15, made him answer. Is this the mechanic who helped my daughter yesterday? Not hello. Not good morning, just that. Straight through, like she was continuing a conversation she'd already been having in her head. The voice was low, controlled. The kind that had spent years learning to sound unbothered. Depends on who your daughter is, Devin said, Brianna. She had a flat tire on Caldwell Road, he remembered. Of course he remembered. 17 years old, standing in the rain next to a silver Audi that cost more than his monthly rent, trying to look like she wasn't scared. She was scared. She just didn't want him to see it. She got home okay, he asked. A pause. Brief. Like the question surprised her. She did. My name is Celeste Vance. My driver will pick you up in 30 minutes. Then, she hung up. Devin stared at his phone. 30 minutes. Not a question. Not could you possibly. Just 30 minutes. He thought about saying no. He thought about calling back and explaining that he had a shop to open and a son to get ready for school. And he didn't just get in cars with strangers because their mother told him to. He thought about all of that. Then Isaiah appeared in the doorway, pajamas wrinkled, hair sideways, one eye still mostly closed. He was holding the stuffed elephant that Renee bought him the last Christmas she was well enough to go shopping. The ears were worn thin from too much loving. Isaiah didn't sleep without it. Who called? Isaiah asked. Customer, Devin said. At 6:42 in the morning. Go eat breakfast. Isaiah looked at him the way he always looked when he knew there was more to the story. Head tilted slightly, patient, willing to wait. That look was 100% Renee. Is it the girl with the fancy car? He asked. Devin blinked. How do you know about that? I heard you telling her not to go over 50 on the spare. You were supposed to be asleep. I was almost asleep. Isaiah climbed onto the kitchen stool. Which is different. Devin poured cereal into a bowl, only halfway. Not because he was being stingy. Because that was what was left until Friday and he'd already done the math twice. He added milk. Isaiah never noticed. Or if he did, he never said. It might be about her, Devin admitted. I might need to step out for a bit this morning. Mrs. Patterson will walk you to the bus. Isaiah nodded. Serious. 9 years old and serious about everything that mattered. Dad, yeah. What if I don't make the team? Devin put down the cereal box. He walked around the counter and crouched down so his eyes were level with his son's. Renee used to do that, meet Isaiah right where he was, not from above, but from a distance. Right there. Then you try again next time, Devin said. But with that brain of yours, they'd be making a serious mistake. Isaiah considered this. Jason Tanner already knows how to do long division in his head. So do you. Jason's faster. Isaiah, what? Eat your cereal. Almost a smile. Almost. Then Isaiah looked out the window and the smile didn't quite arrive and Devin recognized that look too. The look of a boy carrying something he didn't have words for yet. They ate together without talking. The black car arrived at 7:14. Devin had been in expensive cars before, back when he worked at Crestwood Engineering and they sent town cars for client meetings. Back when his suits were pressed and his shoes were shined and his future looked like something worth planning for. That was a different life. The driver didn't speak, didn't offer his name, just opened the door and gestured, and that was apparently the whole interaction. Devin got in. The leather was the color of dark coffee. The seats were the kind of soft that made you feel like you were being absorbed. He looked back once. Isaiah was at the upstairs window. Small hand flat against the glass. Devin raised 2 fingers. A quiet goodbye. Then the car moved and the window was gone and it was just him and the road and that Isti waking up around them. He pulled out his phone, searched the name. Celeste Vance. The results came fast. Forbes, Fortune, Business Insider. A photograph of a woman in a dark blazer, arms crossed, standing in front of a building made almost entirely of glass. Sharp features, sharper eyes. The kind of posture that said built this and I know it. Celeste Vance, founder and CEO of Vance Aeronautics. Pioneer in autonomous aerospace systems. Named one of the most influential executives in American technology 3 years running. Devin stared at the screen, and then the memory hit him, not a soft one, a hard one with edges. 5 years ago. The main conference room at Crestwood Engineering, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Devin standing at the front of the room with his engineering notebook and his presentation slides and 6 months of work built into a proposal for a new electromagnetic shielding system. Something he genuinely believed could change how the industry thought about power management in high-performance vehicles. The board had been polite. And in the back of the room, almost separate from everyone else, a woman in a dark blazer had watched with an expression he couldn't read. Not bored, not impressed, just watching, calculating something he wasn't privy to. 3 weeks later, the acquisition was announced. 2 months after that, Devin was clearing out his desk. He put his phone in his pocket. The car turned through an iron gate and up a long driveway lined with trees that had been planted specifically to make you feel small. The estate appeared through the morning mist like a statement, modern, angular, glass and steel, perched on the edge of a ridge that looked out over the whole city. A man in a dark suit led him through doors that opened before they were touched, across floors that reflected the light, through a hallway where the art on the walls was the kind you didn't get at a gallery. You got it at an auction. Wait here, the man said, and then he left. Devin stood alone in a sitting room with furniture so low and deliberate, it looked like it had been placed by someone who thought about weight distribution. One wall was entirely glass. Beyond it, the city stretched out in every direction, just beginning to catch the sun. He didn't sit down. He looked at the wall of framed achievements instead. Magazine covers, award citations, a photograph of Celeste at a podium, another of the Vance Aeronautics campus, a glass and steel structure that made the estate look modest by comparison. He was still looking when she arrived. Mr. Holloway, the voice was the same one from the phone, but in person it had physical weight. Presence. Celeste Vance stood in the doorway. She was taller than he expected, slender but not slight. Early 40s, though she carried it with the ease of someone who had stopped counting. Dark blazer, dark pants. hair pulled back in a way that was either effortless or took 20 minutes to look that way. He genuinely could not tell. Her eyes were precise. The eyes of someone who processed information constantly and filed it before you noticed she'd looked. "Thank you for coming," she said. She gestured toward the seating area near the window, moved to a low table and poured coffee from a carafe without asking if he wanted any. Set the cup in front of the chair across from where she would sit. Devin sat. The chair probably cost more than his truck. He was fairly certain of it. He picked up the cup. Porcelain so thin he was afraid his hands would break it. He took a sip. Complex, rich. Nothing like the burnt offering from his shop's old pot. He hated how good it was. "You helped my daughter yesterday," Celeste said. She remained standing, Brianna. "Flat tire on Caldwell Road." "Yes," she looked at him directly. "Why?" Devin blinked. "Why? You closed your shop early. You helped a stranger. You refused payment." A pause. "Why?" He looked at her. Because the question was real. She actually wanted to know. She wasn't making conversation. She was running a calculation and needed the variable because she needed help, he said. She was a kid, alone, in the rain. What else would anyone do? Celeste studied him. "You'd be surprised," 3 words, but they carried something learned, something that had cost her. She moved to the window. Her silhouette against the morning light was precise. 3 years ago, she said, someone attempted to take Brianna. She was 14. Her father, Walter, my ex-husband, reached her in time. He was shot twice, a pause that she controlled. He survived. But the damage to his brain was extensive. He no longer recognizes Brianna. He doesn't know who she is. The room went very quiet. Devin set his cup down. "I'm sorry," he said, not as a formality, just because it was true. "Few people know the details," Celeste continued. "We've kept it private, to protect Brianna from attention, and to avoid encouraging anyone with similar ideas." She turned. "So perhaps now you understand why a stranger showing interest in my daughter gives me reason to look closely." Devin felt a flash of something, not quite anger. "Adjacent to it, I changed a tire," he said. "I let her use my phone to call you. That's the whole story." And yet she moved to the coffee table, picked up a folder. "You made quite an impression." She slid a document across. He looked at it. Looked again. The monthly retainer figure at the top was not a number he had ever seen applied to his name. "Not in this direction. Vance Aeronautics maintains a corporate fleet of 18 vehicles," she said, "plus personal vehicles for senior staff. Currently, we use a service provider downtown at considerable expense and inconvenience." She sat across from him. "Your qualifications exceed our current provider. Your location is more convenient to our main campus. And my daughter trusts you." She let that land. "In my experience," she added, "that's rarer than any credential on a resume." Devin looked at the contract, thought about Renee's hospital bills, 3 years old and still arriving in the mailbox. Thought about Isaiah's college fund, emptied and never refilled. Thought about the shop roof that leaked when it rained hard. Then he looked up. "Why offer this to someone you've known for 5 minutes?" Something moved in Celeste's expression, just enough. "I don't make impulsive decisions, Mr. Holloway." "Nobody who has what you have makes impulsive decisions," he said. "Which means you've already decided. Which means this conversation is about something else." A silence. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him from the back of that conference room 5 years ago. Like he'd just become a more interesting problem. "Take the contract," she said. "Review it. My number is on the card." He stood, picked up the folder. "Didn't commit to anything. I appreciate the offer," he said. "But I'd like some time." For the first time, something that wasn't strategy passed through her face. "Gone in a moment, of course," she said. He was almost to the door when she spoke again. "Your son, Isaiah." A pause. "You mentioned you're helping with his baseball team." He turned around, unofficially. "Are you any good?" The question was so completely out of place that he actually laughed. "Short. Surprised, terrible," he said. "But I show up." Apparently that's what matters most to him. Celeste looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly longer than expected. "Yes," she said quietly. "Sometimes it is." He did not sign the contract that evening. He set it on his workbench instead, beside his coffee mug and his wrench and a photograph of Isaiah at the lake the summer before everything got hard. Grinning at the camera with a fish too small to keep and a pride too big for the moment. He looked at the contract, looked at the photo. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. 4 words and an initial. "Don't sign yet." B. He stared at it. Brianna Vance. She must have saved his number when she borrowed his phone on Caldwell Road. 17 years old. Of course she did. He didn't respond, but he didn't sign either. 2 days later, Thursday morning, the bell above the garage door jangled and Brianna Vance walked in like she owned the place. No call ahead, no appointment, just her, standing in the middle of his shop in a cashmere sweater and boots that had never seen actual weather, looking around at his tools and his workbench and his organized chaos like she was cataloging it. She looked different than she had in the rain on Caldwell Road, put together, polished. The kind of put together that took effort and was designed to look effortless, except her eyes. Her eyes were the same, wary. Older than 17 had any right to be. You didn't sign it, she said. Not a question, you've been checking. My mom checks every hour. She thinks she's subtle. Brianna moved closer to the workbench, ran 2 fingers along the edge without touching anything. She's not. How'd you know I'd be here? I looked up your hours. Devin set down his socket wrench. What do you want, Brianna? She looked at him steadily. I want to know if you're like everyone else. I'm a mechanic in Atlanta. I'm exactly like everyone else. No, you're not. She pulled something from her bag, a folded sheet of paper, set it on the workbench between them like she was playing a card in a game she'd been waiting years to play. You were at Crestwood Engineering, senior level. You had patents pending. You specialized in electromagnetic shielding systems for high-performance applications. A pause. And then my mother's company bought Crestwood, and you lost your job, and 2 months later your wife got sick. He looked at the paper, then at her. You Googled me, he said. I Google everyone who helps me without wanting anything back. She met his eyes. It's a short list. He almost said something to that. Didn't. What's in the paper? He asked instead. She unfolded it slowly. A technical specification sheet, heavily redacted, entire sections blacked out so completely that whatever they'd said was gone. But the header was intact, the logo was intact, Vance Aeronautics, and below that, in plain type, Project Nightfall. Devin's eyes moved across what remained visible, his engineer's brain engaged before the rest of him could catch up. Electromagnetic pulse delivery, directional calibration, yield parameters, target selectivity at variable range. This wasn't civilian research. This wasn't the autonomous aerospace systems Vance Aeronautics was known for. This was a weapon. Where did you get this? He asked. My father's files. Her voice was careful, controlled in the way of someone who had practiced being controlled because the alternative was falling apart. Before the shooting, he was investigating something inside the company. He found this. A pause. He told me to keep it somewhere safe. He said if anything happened to him, I'd understand why. Devin looked at the page for a long moment. Brianna, he chose each word deliberately. This is a serious thing to be carrying around. I know. If the wrong people find out you have it, I know. She didn't look away. That's why I need to know if you're going to tell my mother about this conversation. He thought about the contract on his workbench, the number at the top, what it would mean for Isaiah, for Renee's debt, for the shop roof, for every small weight that had accumulated over 3 years of staying just barely okay. He thought about all of it. Why would your mother care if you have this? He asked. Because she might be the one who started it. Silence. The garage felt smaller suddenly. What makes you think that? He asked. Because my father thought so. Something moved through her face. Pain that had been living there long enough to feel permanent. He was the CFO before the divorce. He understood every system in the company, every authorization protocol, every financial structure, and he found something he wasn't supposed to find. Her voice stayed level. 3 weeks later, someone put 2 bullets in him. She folded the paper, put it back in her bag. I'm not asking you to believe me, she said. I'm asking you to not tell her I was here. Devin looked at her for a long moment. 17. Carrying something that could get her hurt. Carrying it alone because there was no one else. He recognized that weight. He'd been carrying his own version for 3 years. I won't tell her, he said. Something in Brianna's shoulders released, just slightly. Like she'd been holding herself at a particular tension and could now hold it slightly less. And Brianna, she looked up, next time you come here, call first, the ghost of something. Not quite a smile but in the same family crossed her face. Yes sir, she said. Then she left. He stood in the quiet garage for a long time afterward, looking at the contract, looking at the photograph of Isaiah, looking at the space where a 17-year-old girl had just set down something heavy and walked back out into the world, still carrying it. He still didn't sign. Friday morning the Tesla arrived at 8 o'clock exactly, driven by another man in another dark suit who handed over a sealed envelope and left in a second car waiting at the curb. The envelope contained access codes, diagnostic credentials, and a typed page of service requirements. Everything precise. Everything exactly what a careful person would prepare. The Tesla was remarkable. Even Devin, who had spent enough time around expensive machinery to be past being impressed by it, found himself appreciating the engineering. He connected his diagnostic equipment and ran the standard sweep, going through the vehicle systems the way he always did. Methodically, starting from the beginning, not assuming anything was fine until he'd confirmed it, which was why he caught it, a secondary processing unit, embedded behind the primary onboard computer housing, not in the factory schematic, not in any documentation the manufacturer had ever published. He ran the diagnostic twice. Still there, he pulled up the manufacturer's technical blueprint on his laptop pop and compared it line by line with what the vehicle's system was reporting. The extra unit monitored location data continuously. It recorded ambient audio through the cabin's microphone array. It tracked the wireless signatures of any device coming within 15 feet of the car, professional hardware, custom installation. The kind of work that cost serious money and required someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone was listening to Celeste Vance, and she didn't know it. Devin took 11 photographs, close up, every angle, serial numbers where visible, connection points, transmission modules. He documented everything the way an engineer documents things, completely, in order without skipping steps. Then he closed his laptop and heard the bell above the door. The man who walked in was somewhere in his early 50s, close-cropped gray at his temples, a suit that made Celeste's sitting room furniture look reasonably priced. Shoes shined recently, a watch that didn't need charging. He moved through the garage like a man accustomed to better spaces, too well-mannered to mention it, Mr. Holloway. He extended his hand, firm, practiced. The handshake of someone who had been in many rooms and always left having made a favorable impression. Preston Ashford, CFO of Vance Aeronautics. I wanted to stop by personally to welcome you to the team. I haven't signed yet, Devin said. A formality. Ashford waved it away pleasantly. His eyes moved around the shop, taking inventory without appearing to. Celeste speaks very highly of your capabilities. He moved toward the Tesla, ran one finger along the roofline, admiring it or measuring it. Hard to say which. I knew your name sounded familiar when she mentioned it. You were the lead on electromagnetic shielding research at Crestwood before the acquisition. Remarkable work. Forced by circumstance into a different direction, he turned. That's unfortunate. Devin watched him. Said nothing. I'll be direct, Ashford said pleasantly. Celeste sometimes makes decisions around Brianna that are more emotional than strategic. This contract may be one of them. I want to make sure our new service provider understands that Vance Aeronautics operates with clear expectations of discretion. I fix cars, Devin said. Discretion's built in, Ashford smiled. The corners of it. Of course. I only mean that if Brianna were to visit your shop, if she were to share concerns she's overheard or misunderstood about company matters. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a business card on the workbench. A conversation with me first would be the appropriate path. He said it the way you'd say something obviously reasonable. Then he mentioned Isaiah Smooth, casual. Like it was a natural continuation. Your son is at Carmichael Elementary. 4th grade. Mrs. Foster's class? A pause, light and easy. The math team tryouts went well, I understand. Second alternate. That's quite an achievement. The words landed like something physical. Isaiah's teacher. Isaiah's math team placement. Information that had only been posted on the school bulletin board 2 days ago. Information that required knowing exactly where to look and exactly when. Devin did not move. He did not pick up the business card. He looked at Ashford and kept his voice completely level. I'll keep that in mind. Ashford held his gaze for just a moment. Something behind his pleasant expression that wasn't pleasant at all. Then he nodded. Welcome to the family, Mr. Holloway. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Celeste car by 3, I believe. He left. Devin stood in the silence that followed. He looked at the business card on his workbench, looked at his phone, looked at the 11 photographs he'd taken of hardware that was recording every conversation in Celeste Vance's personal vehicle without her knowledge. He thought about Brianna saying my mother might be the one who started it. He thought about Preston Ashford saying Isaiah's teacher's name like it was just information. Like knowing where a man's son went to school and who taught him was ordinary, normal, the kind of thing concerned colleagues carried around. He completed the Tesla's service, submitted the invoice electronically. Said nothing about the monitoring unit. He photographed Ashford's business card, then put the card itself in the trash. At 3 o'clock the driver came for the Tesla, took the keys, left. The garage was quiet after that. Devin went upstairs. He called Kendall Brewster, Crestwood Engineering, class of 2008. Now doing independent cybersecurity consulting from a home office in Decatur. The most paranoid person Devin had ever genuinely liked. He answered on the second ring. Kellum's Diner, Devin said. 7 tonight. Secure line, a pause. How secure? Very. I'll bring the jammer. A beat. That good? Bring the good jammer, Devin said. He hung up, stood in the kitchen, looked at Isaiah's note on the refrigerator. Math team today, 3 red circles. He was so caught up that he'd forgotten to check the results. He called Isaiah's cell. 2 rings, Dad. The voice barely contained itself. Well, second alternate. A pause that was pure theater, which is basically the team. Devin sat down on the kitchen stool, pressed his hand to his face for just a moment. That's my boy, he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Kellum's Diner occupied a corner in a working neighborhood far enough from downtown that nobody from downtown ever ended up there by accident. Its vinyl booths had been there since the 80s. The overhead lights buzzed faintly at a frequency you stopped noticing after 3 minutes. The coffee was reliably mediocre and always hot. Devin liked it for exactly that reason. Nothing about it was trying. He arrived at 6:52. Kendall was already in the back booth, laptop open, a small device running in the corner of the screen with a green indicator light. 5 years since Crestwood. Kendall looked exactly the same wire-rimmed glasses, same natural that needed a trim, same way of leaning forward like he was perpetually about to say something important. He looked up, grinned, stood and pulled Devin into a hug more enthusiastic than Devin expected, and exactly what he needed. Man, Kendall said. Too long. Thanks for coming on short notice, you said. Secure line. Kendall sat back down and tapped the laptop. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I had the jammer running. Anyone within 40 feet trying to pick up this conversation is getting a continuous loop of a 2003 Silverado with a bad alternator. Still paranoid, Devin said. Still correct. Kendall folded his hands. Talk, Devin talked. He laid out the shape of it first. The flat tire Monday morning, Celeste's call Tuesday. The contract, the garage visit from Brianna Thursday. The Tesla Friday and what he'd found inside it. He watched Kendall move through skepticism and then sharpened interest and then something more alert. Then he put his phone on the table, pulled up the photographs. Kendall took the phone. Looked at the first image, looked at the second. By the third, he'd leaned forward. By the 6th, his expression had gone very still in the way that meant he was processing faster than he was reacting. Where exactly in the vehicle? He asked. Secondary processing unit. Behind the primary onboard computer housing. Custom installation. Not factory, custom how. Transmission module on a proprietary frequency. Heavily encrypted output. Not commercial hardware. Kendall scrolled back through the images. This isn't off the shelf. The architecture is built for sustained monitoring. Weeks. Months, possibly. Not a quick intelligence grab. He set the phone down. Someone's been listening to her for a long time. Someone with resources, Devin said. And access. Who's the client? A beat. Kendall caught it. He always caught things. That good, he said. Celeste Vance. Silence then. Vance Aeronautics. Yes. Kendall sat back slowly. Someone inside one of the largest aerospace technology companies in the country has been running sustained audio and location surveillance on the CEO. In her personal vehicle, he looked at Devin over the glasses. And you came to a diner. I came to you. Same thing. But he was already pulling the laptop closer, already typing. I'm going to need more than photos. If I can identify the transmission frequency, I might be able to trace the receiving end. Figure out who's listening and from where. Can you do that without physical access to the unit? With what you've given me? Maybe. Takes time. He paused. You said there's more. How much more? Devin thought about Brianna's face when she'd set that document on his workbench. The careful way she'd unfolded it. Like it was fragile, more than I should tell you in a diner, he said. And then the bell above the entrance chimed, and Devin looked up, and for a full 2 seconds he thought he was misreading the room. Because the woman walking through the door of Kellum's Diner at 7:18 on a Friday evening was not the kind of woman who walked through that door under any circumstances. Celeste Vance, dark jeans, simple blazer, hair down for the first time, no driver, no assistant. Moving through the worn vinyl and the flickering lights with the same posture she'd had in the glass-walled sitting room above the city. She found him immediately. She always found things immediately. Devin did not move. Kendall, who had turned to look, turned back very slowly and said under his breath, "Is that yes, did you?" "No." She reached the booth, looked at Kendall once, filed him completely, then looked at Devin. "I followed you," she said. "No apology in it. I gathered, may I sit?" Not a question. Kendall slid over without being asked. She sat. A waitress appeared and Celeste said coffee black, and the waitress left. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Celeste said, "You found something in my car." Devin looked at her. She looked back. "You knew," he said. "I suspected. My security team ran a sweep of the main garage 2 days ago and picked up an active transmission signal they couldn't locate the source of. When I sent the car to your shop and the signal disappeared from the garage, I had a reasonable hypothesis. You sent the car to me to confirm it. I sent the car to you because I needed someone outside the company to find what my own team couldn't, or wouldn't." Her coffee arrived. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The first time Devin had seen her hold anything like she needed the warmth. "You photographed the unit I did, and came here to have someone analyze those photographs." She glanced at Kendall. "Someone with relevant expertise." Kendall, to his credit, said nothing. Just adjusted his glasses. "Who did you think was listening?" Devin asked. "I didn't know." That was the problem. She looked at the table for a moment, something working behind her eyes. 3 months ago, I began finding anomalies in the company's financial system. Small ones, the kind that could be dismissed as rounding errors. But I've been reading our financials for 15 years. I know what anomalies look like and what they mean." She looked up. "Someone has been running an unauthorized research initiative inside Vance Aeronautics for at least 3 years, using company resources, under falsified authorization protocols," Devin said. "Project Nightfall." The coffee cup touched the table harder than she intended, not shattering, just contact, the sound of composed control slipping 1 inch. She looked at him, really looked. For the first time since she'd walked in, Celeste Vance looked like a person who had been carrying something very heavy alone and had just seen someone else reach for part of it. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. "Brianna." A breath. "Slow, of course," she said quietly. "She has a partial technical specification. From Walter's files. He gave it to her before the shooting, told her to keep it safe." Celeste was very still. "Walter gave her that. She's been holding it for 3 years." Silence settled over the table like weather coming in. Kendall, who had been listening with the careful attention of someone memorizing everything, said, "The authorization anomalies in the financials. Were they traceable to a specific level?" Celeste looked at him, "Senior executive. But the credentials used were not mine. They were falsified using a security architecture that only 2 people in the company understood deeply enough to replicate." A pause. "Walter. And the person Walter trained." Devin said the name before she did. "Preston Ashford." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "He came to my shop today," Devin said. Her head turned. "The morning I serviced your Tesla. He came in, introduced himself, said he wanted to welcome me to the team." Devin kept his voice level. "Then he mentioned Isaiah, by name, by teacher, by his placement in the math team tryouts. Information posted at the school 2 days ago. The temperature at the table changed." Celeste set her cup down very precisely, like placing it exactly right so she could give her full attention to what she said next. "He mentioned your son," she said. "He let me understand that he knew things he had no reason to know." "That's not a warning," Kendall said. "That's a message. I know what it is," Devin said. Celeste looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not softer, just stripped of the performance of authority, just a person across a table. "I did not know about the surveillance in my car. I need you to understand that." "I don't know what to understand yet," Devin said honestly. "But I'm still at this table." Something crossed her face. "The beginning of something. Then let me tell you what I know," she said. "And we'll go from there," she talked. Kendall took notes. Devin listened. And by the time the diner had gone quiet around them, and the elderly couple at the counter had long since gone home, and the mediocre coffee had been refilled twice, the shape of it was laid out between them like a map of somewhere none of them had meant to go. Project Nightfall, an electromagnetic pulse weapon. directed, precise, capable of disabling specific categories of electronic infrastructure within a defined radius without disrupting surrounding systems. Not a research proposal, a working development program. 3 years in, housed in a restricted sub-facility of the Vance Aeronautics campus south of the city, funded through concealed budget lines, authorized through falsified credentials, operated entirely outside the knowledge of the board, developed by Preston Ashford. Using Celeste's company, using Walter's financial architecture, and when Walter found it, traced the money and identified the program and started asking questions. Someone had arranged for him to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The official story was a random attempt, Celeste said. Wrong place, wrong time. Walter intervened to protect Brianna and was shot. Brianna doesn't believe that, Devin said. Brianna is right. Celeste's voice was flat. The shooting happened on a street Walter chose that morning. A route he changed last minute because of construction on his usual way. No one could have predicted that specific route, which means they weren't following a plan. They were following him, ready to move whenever an opportunity came, a pause. When it came on a quiet street, they moved. He's been at Riverside Recovery for 3 years, she added. He has good days and difficult ones. On the good days, he knows where he is and can follow a conversation. Sometimes he asks about Brianna, a pause so small it was almost not a pause. On the difficult days, he doesn't know his own name. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Kendall said, "The surveillance in your car. If I can trace the transmission to a receiving server, I can identify who's monitoring and how extensively." He looked at Devin. "But I need access to the unit. Not just photographs. The car went back this afternoon," Devin said. "Is there another vehicle in the fleet with a similar installation?" Devin looked at Celeste. She said, "Preston uses a company, Tahoe, assigned specifically to him. If he installed surveillance on your vehicle," Kendall said, "there's a good probability he runs counter-monitoring on his own, to know if anyone is watching him while he watches you. I need access to that vehicle," Kendall said. "That's not something I can arrange quietly," Celeste said. "As of 2 hours ago, the board voted to place me on administrative leave pending a governance review." The table went quiet. Preston presented a report characterizing my recent behavior as erratic and financially concerning. She continued, "He's been building that file for months, each step covering the one before it." She looked at her cup. "And I walked into it." "You didn't know," Devin said. "I should have known. Not self-pity. Something harder and more honest than that." "You can't see what you're not looking for," he said. She looked up at him, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the contract or the company or the surveillance hardware in a car. Just two people who had each lost something they hadn't seen coming. Just recognition. Kendall's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then at Devin. Preliminary frequency analysis from the photos. The transmission architecture matches a commercial platform adapted for extended executive monitoring. But the receiving server is registered to a private holding company. He turned the phone toward Devin. Georgia Incorporation. Filed 3 years ago. No public record. Right when nightfall started, Devin said. Right when nightfall started, Kendall confirmed. Celeste looked at the phone. "Can you trace it to a person?" "To a registered agent, which is usually a law firm, which is usually a wall." Kendall put the phone away. "But if I can get into the transmission stream itself, actually intercept the data being sent from a live unit." "You need the hardware," Devin said. "I need the hardware." They looked at each other. "I'll find access to another vehicle in the fleet," Devin said. "Give me until Tuesday." He drove home through the city with the windows down because he needed the air. It was almost 10. The streets were moving slowly the way Atlanta moves at night. Not empty. Just different. He thought about Renee. He did that on drives. Talked to her in his head the way he couldn't in person anymore. Laid things out for her the way she used to lay things out for him when a problem felt too large. He could hear her voice. "Devin, baby, why are you in the middle of this? Because I'm already in the middle of it. Nobody made you answer the phone. Nobody made me," he thought. "Here we are." He could hear her laughing, that specific laugh. The one that meant "I love you and you're impossible" in the same breath. He parked outside the shop, looked up at the second-floor windows. Isaiah's light was still on. Past his bedtime. Probably reading. He did that. Stayed up with the lamp on low, convinced no one noticed. Devin always noticed. He went upstairs, knocked on Isaiah's door. "Lights out," he said through the wood. A pause. The line of light under the door disappeared. Good night, Dad. Good night, Isaiah. He stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to his son settle. Then he went back downstairs, opened his engineering notebook, the one he hadn't touched since the day he boxed up his desk at Crestwood. The one with the worn cover and the pages that still smelled faintly like 5 years ago. He turned to a clean page. At the top he wrote, "What I know." Below that he began mapping the connections the way an engineer maps a problem. Starting with certainty, working outward to inference, marking clearly what was still missing. At the bottom of the second page he wrote one sentence. He looked at it for a while, then he underlined it twice. Nobody hired a mechanic to fix cars this badly. He closed the notebook, went to bed, lay in the dark for a while, thinking about Brianna carrying a redacted document in her bag for 3 years, thinking about Preston Ashford saying Isaiah's teacher's name like it was nothing, thinking about the decision he hadn't made yet, which was, he knew, already a decision. He fell asleep around midnight. In the morning, Isaiah was already downstairs, and the orange juice was in a glass, not in the coffee mug, and on the refrigerator, below the math team announcement in its 3 red circles, Isaiah had added a new line in smaller letters. Dad came to check the list with me. That's the best part. Devin stood at the top of the stairs and read it twice. Then he went down to start another Monday. Monday passed the way Mondays do when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Mrs. Patterson came in at 8 for her tire pressure check. Devin checked the tires. They were fine. They were always fine. She stayed 23 minutes and talked about her neighbor's new dog and a television program she'd been watching about families who restored old houses, and whether Devin thought restoring old houses was a reasonable retirement project for a woman of 71. Devin said it sounded like a good idea. She said she'd think about it. She tipped him $4 for a service that cost nothing and left smiling, and Devin watched her go and thought about how much of his actual job had nothing to do with cars. He finished the brake job that had been waiting since Friday, completed an oil change for a regular customer who always brought coffee and always stayed to talk longer than Devin had time for, and who he never rushed because some things mattered more than the schedule. Between jobs, he sat at his workbench and looked at the notebook, the map he'd built Friday night, the connections, the variables, the sentence at the bottom with the double underline. He added to it slowly through the day. Small additions, observations, questions he didn't have answers to yet. Who knew about nightfall beyond Ashford? How long had the board been compromised? What exactly had Walter found before the shooting? Not the partial specification Brianna had shown him, the full picture. The thing Walter had been building toward, that was the gap in everything. Walter had known, Walter had documented, and Walter could not tell anyone what he'd found, which meant the documentation still existed somewhere. Had to. A man careful enough to give his daughter a redacted technical spec as insurance was careful enough to have built something more complete. Something that didn't require him to be present to be useful. Devin wrote that down, underlined it. At 3:15, he locked the shop and drove to Carmichael Elementary. Isaiah came out the front doors, moving fast the way he always moved when he'd been sitting still for 6 hours, and his body had decided it was done with that. He saw the truck and his face did the thing it always did. The immediate, uncomplicated brightness of a kid who was genuinely glad to see his father. Devin felt it every time. He hoped he never stopped feeling it. How was it? Devin asked when Isaiah climbed in. Good. Isaiah buckled his seatbelt. We had a substitute for math. She didn't know how to do the long division the way Mrs. Foster does, so Jason Tanner had to explain it, and he explained it wrong, and then I explained it right, and the substitute thanked me in front of the whole class. That must have felt good. It felt amazing, Isaiah considered. Jason wasn't happy though. Jason will survive. Probably. Isaiah looked out the window. Dad, can I ask you something? You can always ask me something, the fancy car lady. And the thing you're not telling me about. He paused. Is it the kind of thing where everything is fine, or the kind of thing where you're saying everything is fine but it's not? Devin drove for a moment before answering. It's the kind of thing I'm working on, he said. Isaiah nodded slowly. Okay. You always figure it out, Isaiah said it simply. Like a fact. Like something he'd observed and filed as reliable. You figured out the thing with the shop lease. And the thing with the insurance after Mom. And the thing with my school when they said I was in the wrong reading level. He shrugged. You always figure it out eventually. Devin kept his eyes on the road. His son had just described 3 of the worst months of his life as things his father had figured out. Which was accurate, which was also not the whole story. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the right amount of the story for a 9-year-old to carry. I'm working on it, Devin said again. Isaiah seemed satisfied with that. They drove home. Tuesday morning, Devin called ahead. Riverside Recovery opened visitor hours at 9. He'd already confirmed with Brianna by text the night before. 1 word from her. Confirmed. Then a second message 10 minutes later. He has a good window Tuesdays before therapy. He picked her up at 8:50 outside a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Vance Aeronautics main campus. She was standing on the sidewalk with a bag over one shoulder and a cup of something she wasn't drinking, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Hair pulled back simply. She looked younger this way, or maybe she just looked her age. She got in without saying anything. He pulled back into traffic. They drove through the Tuesday morning city in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The kind of silence between people who have already said enough hard things that quiet feels earned. Brianna looked out the window. After a few minutes, she said, "He has good Tuesdays sometimes. Not always. But sometimes, what's a good Tuesday look like?" Devin asked. "He knows where he is. He can follow what you're saying. He doesn't always respond, but he follows." A pause. "Sometimes he asks about me. In the third person. Like he knows there's a daughter but can't quite connect it to the person in the room." Her voice was steady. "Practiced at being steady. The doctors say that's actually progress." Devin nodded. Didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything useful to say to that. Riverside Recovery sat at the edge of a quiet street in Decatur. Trees out front. A sign that was tasteful on purpose. The kind of facility that cost serious money and worked very hard not to look like it. Inside, the hallways were clean and warm and smelled like something trying to be calming. A nurse greeted Brianna by name, led them down a corridor where the light came in through tall, narrow windows on one side only. Reuven 14. Brianna knocked softly. Pushed the door open. Walter Vance was sitting by the window. He was 47. He looked older, the way certain kinds of damage age a person from somewhere the eye can't quite locate. His hands rested on the arms of the chair. His eyes were open, fixed on the garden beyond the glass. Someone had planted that garden with clear intention. Low beds of something that stayed green year-round, a path between them, a bench. He didn't turn when they came in. Brianna crossed the room without hesitation. She pulled a chair close, sat, took his hand between both of hers the way you do something you've done so many times it's become its own kind of language. "Hey Dad," she said. Her voice was different here, not careful the way it was everywhere else. Not controlled or measured or prepared for something. Just open, just hers. The voice of a 17-year-old girl talking to her father on a Tuesday morning. Walter didn't answer. She kept going anyway. She told him about school. About a book she'd been reading. About something a classmate said that was genuinely funny, and she described it and laughed a little at her own description. She talked the way you talk when you've stopped waiting for a response and decided that being present is the whole point. That showing up and saying the words out loud is its own form of love even when nobody answers. Devin stood by the door. He kept his hands loose at his sides and he did not move any closer, because he knew this room, not this specific room, but the quality of it, the temperature, the particular quality of silence that exists in a space where someone you love is present but not entirely reachable. He'd spent 4 months in rooms like this, pulling chairs close, holding hands, talking when there was nothing useful to say because the alternative was worse. He looked at the garden Walter was looking at, thought about Renee, about the last good Tuesday she'd had. How they'd sat in the hospital window together, and she'd said the trees outside looked like they were doing their best. And she'd meant it as a joke, and then they'd both cried a little, and then she'd said something funny again because she was always finding the funny thing and he had loved her for that specifically. For always finding the funny thing. He looked away from the window. Brianna reached into her bag. She pulled out an envelope, weathered from handling. The paper soft and slightly creased at the folds from being opened and closed. So many times the creases had gone white. She held it in both hands for a moment, didn't open it. Then she looked at Devin. "He wrote this a week before the shooting," she said quietly. "I didn't find it until 6 months after. He put it in a book he'd given me years earlier. He knew I'd eventually go back to it." A pause. He was careful like that. She held the envelope out. Devin crossed the room, took it carefully. Opened it the way you open something that has already mattered to someone else. 2 pages. Handwritten, clear and deliberate. The writing of a man who had something specific to say and was taking care with each word. Walter addressed it to Brianna directly. He told her he was close to something, that he'd found financial anomalies inside Vance Aeronautics that traced back to a development program with no official existence, that he had spent 2 months documenting everything he could access, that the documentation was embedded inside the company's own servers, disguised as routine test data in a legacy archive that no one but him knew how to find or read. He wrote the access protocol, a specific archive location, a sequence of steps that would retrieve the full file set. He told her that if she was reading this letter and he wasn't there to explain it himself, she should trust her own judgment about who to bring in. And at the bottom of the 2nd page, in slightly smaller writing added after the rest, if they find me before I can finish this, it won't be random, remember that, whatever they say it was, it won't be random. And then below that, in the same smaller hand, I love you more than anything I ever built. Devin folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, handed it back to Brianna. She put it in her bag without looking at it. She'd read it enough times that she didn't need to look at it anymore. She just needed to know it was there. She reached back into the bag and pulled out a small tablet. She opened a folder, turned it toward Devin. I've been building this for 8 months, she said. Since I found the letter, I didn't know what to do with it or who to trust, so I just kept adding to it. He looked at the screen, financial records, transaction logs, a series of payments from a private account connected through a numbered LLC with no public profile. Payments to a security consulting firm that had no public web presence, no listed address, no record of any clients. 3 payments made in the days immediately preceding the date of Walter Vance's shooting. 3 payments. And the account they originated from. He looked at her. She looked back. Preston Ashford, she said. He didn't just build Nightfall. He paid people to make sure my father couldn't finish what he started. Devin looked at the documents again. 8 months she'd been carrying this. 17 years old, carrying proof of who arranged her father's shooting. No one to tell, no one to trust. Building the file anyway because building it was the only thing she could control. Why not the police? He asked. With a financial record and a theory, she turned the tablet back toward herself. Ashford has resources. He has relationships with people who could make this look like a grief-stricken teenager with an imagination. She looked at her father. I needed more. I needed what Dad built, the Nightfall files, the complete documentation, proof of what they developed and who it was built for. The archive he mentioned in the letter, Devin said. It's inside Vance Aeronautics system. In a legacy server only Dad knew how to access. She paused. He wrote the access protocol in the letter. I've had it for months. Devin looked at her carefully. Brianna, I'm not going yet, she said. I know better than to go alone without a plan. A pause. I'm just saying I have what I need to get in when the time comes. The word yet landed the way it always did when she used it, like a door left open. He filed it. They stayed another 20 minutes. Brianna talked. Walter watched the garden. Then, near the end, his hand moved slightly under hers. Not a squeeze. Something less than that and more than nothing. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. She just held on a little tighter. Wednesday, the board made their move. Devin heard about it at noon from Celeste, who called from a number he didn't recognize because her primary phone had been flagged by the company's security system, and she'd switched to a secondary device she kept for reasons she'd had the foresight not to explain to anyone. It's official, she said. Administrative leave pending governance review. Preston has been named acting CEO effective this morning. Devin was under a 2019 Camry with a leaking oil pan. He stayed under it while he listened. The press release uses the phrase orderly transition, Celeste said, which is a way of describing a coup that makes it sound like weather. What do you need from me? I need access to Preston's vehicle. The company Tahoe, a pause. I can arrange for it to come through your shop on a pretext. Routine fleet maintenance. There's a service rotation schedule, and I still have access to the administrative system until they revoke it, which will happen by end of business, Thursday at the latest. Get it here tomorrow morning, Devin said. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, she hung up. Devin stayed under the Camry for another few minutes, finishing the job. Because jobs still needed finishing regardless of what else was happening, and because the particular focus of working with his hands was the only thing that had reliably kept his mind organized for 3 years. He texted Kendall, "Vehicle access tomorrow morning. Be ready." The reply came back in 2 minutes. "Already ready. What time? 7. I'll be there at 6:45. Of course he would. Devin finished the Camry. Did an alignment check on a pickup truck that belonged to a contractor who came in every 6 weeks and always apologized for the state of the cab and never actually cleaned it. Did a battery test on an elderly Buick whose owner had been a regular since before Devin bought the shop from the previous owner 8 years ago, and who had outlasted 3 mechanics and showed no signs of slowing down. Ordinary work. The kind that didn't ask anything of you except attention and accuracy. He was grateful for it. At 3:15 he picked up Isaiah. Isaiah got in the truck and buckled his seatbelt and said, "Jason Tanner told everyone I got lucky on the math team placement." "What did you say?" "I said luck doesn't know long division." Isaiah thought about it. "Was that good?" "That was very good." Isaiah looked satisfied. "I thought so." They drove home. Devin made dinner. Something simple. Something that required enough attention to keep his hands occupied, while Isaiah sat at the kitchen table working through a worksheet about ecosystems that he'd finished before Devin had the water boiling. Isaiah pushed the worksheet aside and watched his father cook. "Dad, yeah, you're worried again." Devin stirred without looking up. "How can you tell? You're being very careful about the pasta." Isaiah leaned his chin on his hand. "You're only that careful when you're thinking about something else." Devin looked at the pasta. He was being careful about the pasta. "I'm working through something," he said. "The work thing?" "Yes. Is it getting better or worse?" Devin considered this honestly. "It's getting clearer," he said. "Clear is different from better, but it's necessary before better can happen." Isaiah thought about this. Like when you have to take the engine apart before you can fix what's wrong. Exactly like that. Isaiah nodded, pulled the worksheet back, found a pencil. "Okay," he said. "Let me know if you need help." Devin looked at his son. "I will," he said. After dinner, after Isaiah was in bed, after the apartment had gone quiet in its particular way, Devin sat at the workbench and added to the notebook. He wrote down what Celeste had told him. The timeline of Ashford's board presentation. The sequence of steps. He wrote down what Brianna had shown him. The payment records, the dates, the LLC structure. He drew lines between things and called Kendall. "I need you to be ready for more than just the vehicle tomorrow," he said. "Define more. If the Tahoe has a similar installation to the Tesla, and I think it will, I need you to not just trace the transmission. I need you to get into the data stream itself. Capture what it's sending, a pause, keyboard sounds. That's a different level of access, Devin. I know, we're talking about intercepting a live surveillance operation. I know what we're talking about." Another pause. "Longer. I'll need to be physically at the vehicle while it's in your shop, not just analyzing photographs afterward." "You'll be here," Devin said. 7 o'clock, 6:45, Kendall said. "I know, I already said 6:45, I know you did." A beat. Then, "Devin, what are we actually getting into here?" Devin looked at the notebook, at the lines he'd drawn, at the sentence at the bottom of the first page, underlined twice. "Something that was already in motion before any of us knew we were part of it," he said. Kendall was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. 6:45. Thursday. The Tahoe arrived at 7:02. Devin signed the fleet maintenance request. The driver left in a company sedan. Kendall was already inside, equipment case open on the secondary workbench. A coffee he'd brought from somewhere that smelled considerably better than the gas station variety Devin usually worked with. They didn't speak much. Devin ran the diagnostic sweep on the Tahoe while Kendall set up his equipment alongside. Different vehicle, different architecture. But the instinct proved right. There it was, not identical to the unit in the Tesla. More sophisticated in some ways. Designed not just to monitor but to transmit in real time and also store locally as a backup. 2-channel redundancy, the kind of system you built when you couldn't afford to miss anything. There. Devin said. Kendall was already looking, different manufacturer. Same operational purpose. He connected his equipment to the vehicle's diagnostic port with an adapter he'd built himself from components Devin didn't recognize. This one's been running longer. 18 months at minimum based on the storage accumulation. He's been monitoring himself, Devin said. Counter-saisons, Kendall confirmed. Recording everything in and around this vehicle. Knowing what was said near him. Who was where. Insurance in every direction. He started running his trace protocol. This is going to take about 40 minutes. Don't touch anything. Devin left him to it. He made coffee, the bad kind. The kind from the old pot in the corner that had been burning the same roast since 6:30 and would burn it until someone remembered to turn it off. He drank it standing by the garage door looking out at the street. Ordinary Thursday morning in Atlanta. A woman walking a dog that outweighed her considerably. A delivery truck double-parked 2 buildings down. A kid on a bicycle moving fast in the wrong direction on a one-way street. His phone rang, unknown number. He answered, Mr. Holloway. Preston Ashford's voice. Perfectly pleasant, like 2 colleagues touching base. I hope I'm not interrupting you are, Devin said. A small laugh, warm in the practiced way, direct. I've always appreciated that. A pause. I wanted to follow up on our earlier conversation. About professional courtesy. I remember the conversation. I thought you might. I also thought you might have had time to consider the current situation at Vance Aeronautics. Things have shifted since we last spoke. I noticed. The board has a great deal of confidence in the current direction of the company, and naturally, service contracts under review will be evaluated with the priorities of new leadership in mind. Another pause. Still pleasant, still easy. The pleasantness of someone who doesn't need to be unpleasant because the message delivers itself. I want to make sure our arrangement starts correctly, Mr. Holloway. I believe in clarity. What do you want? What I mentioned before. A professional understanding, if Brianna contacts you, if she shares concerns about the company, about her father's history with the company, about things she believes she's discovered. He let a moment pass. I'd appreciate knowing before you act on any of it. Devin watched the kid on the bicycle disappear around a corner. And if I'm cooperative, he said. What does that look like? It looks like a very secure future for a man in your position. A contract that doesn't just survive the transition, but expands with it. Additional accounts, senior fleet relationships, a beat, and the kind of stability that lets a father focus on his son instead of his overhead, Isaiah. Again, different words, same message. I'll think about it, Devin said. Of course. Warmth in the voice. Don't take too long. Transients move quickly. Another pause. Give Isaiah my regards. The line went dead. Devin put his phone in his pocket. Stood at the garage door for another minute, then went back inside. Kendall was still at the Tahoe, eyes on his screen. Fingers moving, Devin topped off his bad coffee. Waited. At 8:47 Kendall sat back. I have it, he said. Devin walked over. The full transmission network. Kendall turned the laptop toward him. The Tahoe is one collection point in a system of 5. The Tesla was another. There are 3 more, he pointed to the screen. One in the Vance Aeronautics main boardroom, one in the senior conference room on the executive floor, and one in the office currently occupied by Preston Ashford, which was previously Walter Vance's office. Devin looked at the screen. He's been monitoring everything, Devin said. Every board meeting, every executive conversation, every senior-level decision for at least the past 18 months that we can confirm, possibly longer, Kendall scrolled. He knew what questions were going to be asked before anyone asked them. He knew what concerns the board had before anyone raised them. He built his file on Celeste using information he gathered from her own vehicle over months. He stopped scrolling, and he had a 5th collection point. Devin looked at him. A vehicle registered to a board member named George Tillman, Kendall said. Senior board member, 8 years. He was the one who called the emergency governance session Monday. Ashford was monitoring a board member, Devin said, gathering information about his concerns, his voting inclinations, his private conversations with other board members. Kendall looked up, not just for information, for leverage. In case a board member became difficult, Devin thought about that. About a man who had spent 15 years in the infrastructure of a company, who understood every system, every relationship, every point of pressure, who had used all of that not to build something of his own through legitimate means, but to build a maze with himself at the center. Controlling information, controlling outcomes, monitoring everyone while no one monitored him, the receiving hub, Devin said. The server where all of this transmits, registered to a private LLC Georgian corporation. 3 years old, Kendall closed the laptop. But I have the transmission stream now. I have 18 months of data from this vehicle alone. Board conversations, executive meetings, private calls Ashford made and received in this car. A pause. Devin, this is enough. It's enough to show what he did, Devin said. But we still don't have the Nightfall documentation, the technical proof of what they built and who it was for. Walter's archive, Kendall said. Walter's archive. They looked at each other. Brianna has the access protocol, Devin said. Can she get to it remotely? The archive is on a legacy server inside the Vance Aeronautics sub-facility. It would have to be accessed on-site. Kendall was quiet for a moment. So we need to get inside. We need to get inside, Devin agreed. He called Celeste. She answered on the second ring. He told her what Kendall had found. Told her about the 5 collection points. About Tillman's vehicle. About 18 months of board-level surveillance feeding into a private server. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The sub-facility on Hargrove Road, she said. That's where Nightfall is housed. That's where the legacy server would be. Walter set up the archive there because it was the most isolated part of the company network. The least likely to be swept. Can you get us in? I can get us in through the maintenance access point on the eastern perimeter. I designed the emergency access specifications for that building personally. After Walter's shooting, I updated them without informing Preston. A pause. I wanted at least one way in that he didn't know existed. 3 years ago you were preparing for something like this, Devin said. I was preparing for the possibility, she said. I hoped I was wrong. You weren't. No, they agreed on a plan. Celeste would arrange the logistics. Devin would contact Kendall and have him positioned nearby. They would move Thursday night, after the facility's minimum staffing hours, with enough time to retrieve the archive before the Friday morning shift change restored full security coverage. Devin hung up, looked at the Tahoe, looked at Kendall. Tonight, he said. Kendall pushed his glasses up. I figured. He reached for his equipment case. Started packing methodically. I'll park on Hargrove Road at midnight. Half-mile from the facility perimeter. How did you know it was Hargrove Road? I've been mapping the Vance Aeronautics campus layout since Saturday. Kendall latched the case. I'm paranoid, Devin. Not slow. That evening, after Isaiah was in bed, Devin called Brianna. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. Tonight, he a breath. Then, I know. She texted me, you don't go in alone. You wait for us. I know, Brianna, I know, she said again. Firmer, he believed her, mostly. He sat at the kitchen table after he hung up. The apartment quiet around him. Isaiah sleeping down the hall. The city doing what cities do at 10 o'clock on a Thursday. He took out a piece of paper. Wrote a note, not long, just what mattered. He taped it to the refrigerator below the math team announcement. Then he went downstairs to his workbench, opened a drawer, pulled out his old Crestwood engineering credentials on their lanyard. Hadn't worn them in 5 years. Still had his name. Still had his photograph. Still said senior engineer, electromagnetic systems division. He put them in his jacket pocket, picked up his multi-tool, picked up the small flashlight he kept for working in tight spaces, looked around the garage, at the workbench where he'd built and rebuilt things for 3 years, at the photograph of Isaiah with the fish too small to keep, at the tools hung in their precise order because order was the one thing you could always control. He thought about Renee, about what she would say if she could see him standing here in his garage at 10:30 on a Thursday night, about to go somewhere he had no official reason to be. To retrieve evidence of a weapons program being built inside a company that had taken his career, to help a girl whose father had been shot for finding the same thing Devin was now going to find. She would say, "You already know what you're doing." He did. He turned off the light and went to meet Celeste. The envelope was on the shop doorstep when he came back downstairs. He almost missed it. He was thinking about logistics, about the drive to Hargrove Road, about what they'd need once they were inside. But something made him look down before he stepped over it. White, no stamp, no return address. Set deliberately on the doorstep, not slid under the door, not dropped, placed. He picked it up, opened it. Inside was a single photograph, Isaiah, on the school playground, taken from a distance using elevation. A building across the street or a vehicle with a zoom lens. Clear enough to read his expression, clear enough to see the math team acceptance printout he was showing to a friend. Clear enough to mean everything it was meant to mean, nothing else in the envelope, no note, no words, because it didn't need words. Devin stood in the doorway of his shop holding the photograph of his son. He stood there for a long time, not shaking, not panicking. Just standing with the weight of what he was holding and the weight of what it meant and the weight of what he was going to do anyway. He thought about Preston Ashford's voice on the phone that morning. the pleasant warmth of it. The "Give Isaiah my regards." He thought about a man who had spent 15 years building the infrastructure of something that wasn't his and had decided to take it. Who had covered his tracks with surveillance and leverage, and payments to firms with no addresses. Who had put 2 bullets into a man in front of his 14-year-old daughter because that man had found what shouldn't have been found, and who was now sending photographs of a 9-year-old boy to his father. Devin looked at the photograph one more time. Then he put it face down on the workbench. Not because he wanted to stop seeing it, because he had seen it enough. Because he had felt everything it was intended to make him feel, and he had made his decision on the other side of that feeling. He picked up his phone and called Celeste. "Change of plan," he said. "We move tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." A pause. "What happened?" He sent a photograph of Isaiah. The pause that followed was not long. "I'll be at the corner of Hargrove and Dent at 11:30, she said. "Come alone," he texted Kendall. "Moving tonight, 11:30, Hargrove Road. Be at the half-mile mark." The reply came back in under a minute. "Already here. Parked since 9. Devin looked at the text. Of course he was. He went upstairs one last time. Isaiah's door almost closed. The line of light underneath was gone. Deep even breathing from inside. Devin stood in the hallway. He thought about every decision that had led to this hallway on this night. The phone call Monday morning that he almost didn't answer. The flat tire on Caldwell Road that he had stopped for, because stopping for people who needed help was not a calculation for him. It was just what you did. He thought about Isaiah saying you always figure it out eventually, like it was a fact as reliable as weather. He went back to the kitchen, read the note he'd left on the refrigerator one more time. Then he went downstairs, locked the shop door behind him, and drove toward Hargrove Road, toward Walter Vance's archive, toward whatever came next. Celeste was already at the corner when Devin arrived, dark clothes, hair pulled back, a bag over one shoulder that sat close to her body the way bags sit when they have weight and purpose. She got in without a word. He pulled back into traffic and she pointed left and he drove. No pleasantries, no catching up. Just the road and the quiet and 2 people moving towards something they'd both been circling for different lengths of time. "How did he get the photograph to your shop?" she asked after a few minutes. "Delivered it by hand. Left it on the doorstep." Devin kept his eyes on the road. "He wanted me to know he'd been there. That he could be there whenever he chose." Celeste looked straight ahead. "He's done this before. With other people. Leaving things that don't need to be explained." A pause. "It's how he prefers to communicate when words would be too direct to take back." "How long have you known him?" 15 years. He came to Vance Aeronautics 2 years after I founded it. Walter brought him in. Said Preston was the best financial architect he'd ever seen and that the company needed him." She paused. He was right. Preston was exceptional. He understood systems the way engineers understand systems. Not just the numbers but the relationships between them. The way pressure moves through a structure, and you trusted him completely. For a long time, her voice had no accusation in it, no self-pity, just the flat truth of something that had happened. He was invisible in the best way. He made things work without requiring attention. I could focus on the technology, the vision, the public side of the company, because the infrastructure was handled. A beat. That's what I told myself, but he didn't see it that way. "No," she said. "He didn't." They drove in silence for a while. The city thinned as they moved south. Buildings spread out. More space between lights. The particular quality of Atlanta at 11:30 on a weeknight. Not empty but not present either. "Just the road and what you brought with you." "The maintenance access point," Devin said. "Walk me through it." "Eastern perimeter fence. There's a gate that uses a mechanical combination rather than an electronic reader. 5 digits. I set the combination myself 3 years ago when I updated the emergency access specifications." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "Inside the perimeter there's a utility panel set into the courtyard concrete. Wheel lock, manual. It accesses a maintenance tunnel that runs below the main building and connects to the sub-facility." "How long is the tunnel?" "Approximately 60 meters. Emergency lighting throughout. It empties into a utility corridor in the sub-facility basement." She looked at him. "From there we use my biometric credentials to access the restricted areas. Assuming Preston hasn't revoked them yet, when does that happen?" "Administrative review protocols require 72 hours before full access revocation for departing executives. It's a safeguard against data loss during transitions." A thin pause. Preston designed that protocol. I expect he's regretting it currently. We're inside either 72 hours as of tonight. Yes, Devin thought about the margin, about how close it was, about how much of this entire situation had been decided by margins that narrow, and Kendall Celeste said, half-mile from the perimeter. He's been there since 9, of course he has. He said the same thing about himself. Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed her face. Gone quickly. They turned onto Hargrove Road. The facility sat back from the road behind a perimeter fence with security lighting that illuminated the approaches and kept the buildings themselves in relative shadow. Smart design. Devin had recognized the principle the moment he'd seen the photographs Kendall pulled from the company's public records. You light what people walk toward. You keep the destination harder to read. He parked behind a stand of pine trees 200 yards from the eastern fence, cut the headlights, sat for a moment. Celeste was already opening her door. They moved to the fence in the dark, close to the tree line, away from the cameras covering the open ground. The eastern gate was where she said it was. A section of fencing with a mechanical combination lock recessed into the frame. She worked it by feel. No light, no hesitation. 5 digits in a sequence she hadn't entered since the day she set it, and had kept in her head ever since, because some things you don't write down. The gate opened. They went through. Devin pulled it closed behind them without latching it, in case they needed to move fast on the way out. The courtyard was open ground between the fence and the facility buildings. The security lighting covered most of it, but there was a path along the eastern building wall that stayed in shadow if you stayed close to the brick. They moved along it, low, fast, not running. Running makes noise and suggests panic. They moved like people with a reason to be where they were going. The utility panel was in the northeast corner of the courtyard, set flush with the concrete, easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. The wheel lock was steel and heavy and had not been turned in months. Devin crouched beside it and gripped the wheel with both hands. It resisted. He applied more force, felt the mechanism begin to move, put his shoulders into it. The wheel turned slowly, then faster as the mechanism found its rhythm, and then with a low sound that felt enormous in the courtyard quiet and was probably not as loud as it felt, the hatch disengaged. He lifted it. Cold air from below. A ladder. Red emergency lighting in the tunnel making everything below look like the inside of something urgent. Celeste went first. He followed. Pulled the hatch down behind them. The tunnel was concrete and narrow and smelled like mineral water and old air. The kind of space that existed purely for function. Low enough that Devin had to duck slightly. Long enough that the far end wasn't visible from the entrance. Celeste moved ahead. Confident. Left at the first junction. Right at the second. A longer stretch that ran under the courtyard. She counted steps under her breath. Not out of uncertainty, out of precision. Then another ladder. Another hatch. This one opened into a utility corridor that was properly lit and temperature controlled. The air changed immediately, filtered, managed. The ambient sound of systems working behind the walls. They were inside the sub-facility. Celeste checked her watch. Checked a small device she'd pulled from her bag. Security floor check is at 1:15, she said. We have approximately 22 minutes before they sweep this level. Where's the development lab? This way. They moved through the corridor, past secured doors, past equipment storage. Past a room where something hummed behind the wall in a measured way that Devin's engineer brain identified without being told. Large-scale power storage. The kind of capacity you needed for test cycles on high-output electromagnetic systems. He kept moving. At the end of the corridor, Celeste pressed her palm to a reader. The light went yellow, stayed there, then went green, still active. The door opened and they heard it from somewhere deeper in the facility. Muffled. Impact. Something falling or being knocked over, then a pause, then a shorter sound, then silence. They looked at each other, moved faster through the main development lab. Large, high ceilings, equipment that made Devin's engineer brain fire in a dozen directions at once before he forced it back to forward motion. What they'd built in here was real, the scale of it, the sophistication. Project Nightfall was not a proposal on paper. It was a working program housed in a working facility with working hardware that had clearly been running test cycles for longer than anyone outside this room had known. He kept moving. At the far end of the lab, a door, heavier than the others, secured with a biometric reader and a secondary slot for a credential card. Celeste pressed her palm. produced a card from her bag simultaneously. The mechanism considered. Devin held his breath. Green, the door opened, and there was Brianna. She was in a chair, arms pulled back, zip ties at her wrists. A bruise developing along her left cheekbone that was still forming, still darkening, the kind that would look worse in the morning than it did now. Her bag was on the floor 6 feet away. Out of reach, deliberately, but she was upright, eyes open, alert, present. Whatever had happened in this room, she was still entirely in it. Behind her, one hand resting on the back of the chair, stood Preston Ashford. He looked nothing like he had in Devin's garage. Not the composed, pleasantly threatening CFO who'd placed his business card on the workbench and mentioned Isaiah's teacher like it was just information. That version of him was still in there somewhere, visible in the posture, in the controlled way he held himself. But what was closer to the surface now was something that had been underneath it the whole time. Something that had been kept very carefully below for 15 years and was now in this room, finally in the place it had always been building toward. He held a gun at his side, not raised, not pointed, just held. The way you hold something when you want people to know you have it without requiring the conversation about it. He looked at Devin, then at Celeste. He almost smiled. "Celeste," he said. Like they were running into each other somewhere unexpected. Like this was a coincidence worth acknowledging. I had a feeling. When the alert showed the maintenance tunnel, I thought, who else knows that access point? A pause. "Only you." Celeste was very still. "Let her go, Preston, of course. Easy. Reasonable." The tone of someone who was prepared for this exact conversation. "When we've talked, when we've had the conversation we should have had months ago instead of all of this." "This is finished," Celeste said. "Whatever you believe this is." "It's finished?" He looked at her the way you look at someone who has said something you find almost touching in its incorrectness. "It's been finished since Monday evening when the board voted. I got what I needed from them." A slight shift in his expression. "What remains is a question of how much of the rest of it comes to light and in what form." "All of it," Brianna said. Her voice was steady. Completely steady. The steadiness of someone who had been afraid and had decided to be done with being afraid. Ashford looked down at her, patient. The way adults are patient with children who have said something premature. "Brianna," he said. "All of it," she said again. "I found the archive." Something moved in Ashford's face. Not much, a tightening. "A recalculation happening fast. You haven't had time," he said. "I had time before you found me." She held his gaze. Dad's documentation, the complete Nightfall files, the financial trails, the authorization records, the communication logs showing who you built it for. She didn't look away. "It's already transmitting. The moment I accessed the archive, the transfer initiated, automatic. The way Dad designed it. It goes to the FBI field office in Atlanta and the Department of Justice Technology Division. You can't intercept it. You can't stop it. It's already going." Silence. Devin watched Ashford. The calculation behind the man's eyes was visible. Running options. Working the problem. The mind of someone who had spent 15 years managing complex systems under pressure, trying to find the exit route in a room that was contracting around him. "The archive has been dormant for 3 years, Ashford said. "Dad built it to wait," Brianna said. "He built a lot of things to wait. You're 17. I know how old I am." A longer silence. Celeste spoke into it. "Why did you do it, Preston? Not as a tactic. Not to buy time." The question was genuine. The bewilderment of a person who had trusted someone completely and was still, even here, trying to understand the shape of what had been built behind that trust. Ashford looked at her, and then he said it. He talked the way a man talks when he has been holding something at pressure for a very long time, and the pressure has finally equalized. When putting it down, even here, even in this room with a gun in his hand and federal data transmitting somewhere he couldn't reach, is still a kind of relief. Still necessary. 15 years. 15 years building the financial architecture of Vance Aeronautics from the ground up. He had been there before the company was called Vance Aeronautics, when it was still 3 people and a concept and a lease on a building that smelled like the previous tenant's industrial cleaning products. He had built the systems that made everything else possible. The funding structures, the investment frameworks, the financial protocols that governed how money moved through the company at every level. Walter had been the innovator. Celeste had been the visionary. Preston had been the infrastructure. T. Strafford did not get profiles in Forbes. T. Strafford did not get named at press conferences. Infrastructure appeared in footnotes and acknowledgement sections and internal documents that no one outside the company ever read. For 15 years, he said, I made your names mean something, both of you. I built the foundation, every award you accepted, every cover you appeared on, every valuation milestone the company hit. The structure I built was underneath all of it. His voice stayed level, controlled even now. And I was the footnote. He looked at the gun in his hand for a moment. Project Nightfall was mine, he said. From the concept to the engineering specifications to the development timeline to the client relationships. Mine. For the first time in 15 years, something existed that started in my mind and no one else's. He looked up at Celeste, and the moment it reached completion, the moment the first successful test cycle ran exactly as I designed it. The company would absorb it, the way the company absorbs everything. Vance Aeronautics Innovation, Lawson-era development. Your name on it, Celeste. Not mine. The room was very quiet. Devin looked at him. He looked at the gun. He looked at the face of a man who had done catastrophic things for a reason that was, underneath all the catastrophe, so entirely human that it was almost impossible to hold both things in view simultaneously. The damage he had caused, the source of it, the terrible gap between a legitimate wound and an illegitimate response to it. He thought about Crestwood Engineering, about clearing out his desk. About 6 months of work on an electromagnetic shielding proposal absorbed into company records when the acquisition happened. About standing in that conference room while the board listened politely and a woman in the back row watched with calculating eyes, and 3 weeks later the acquisition announced, and 2 months after that, he was carrying a box to his car. He knew that feeling. He had lived inside that feeling for 5 years, and he had not shot anyone. He had not built a weapon outside regulatory channels and sold it to buyers who wanted to use it to disable other people's infrastructure. He had opened a garage in Atlanta and changed tires and replaced brake pads and made cold coffee and raised his son. That was the difference. That was the only difference between him and the man standing in this room. But it was everything, Preston, he said. Ashford looked at him. Like he'd almost forgotten Devin was there. Like Devin had been furniture until this moment. You built something real, Devin said. I've seen the specifications. What you built in this lab is extraordinary, genuinely. The technical achievement alone is. He paused. Let the engineer in him mean what he was about to say. It's remarkable. You solved problems in directed energy targeting that people have been working on for 20 years. Ashford was quiet, listening, but Walter found it, Devin said. And Walter was going to expose it. Not because he wanted to take credit for what you'd built. Because what you'd built was being sold outside legal authorization to buyers who don't answer to anyone. He kept his voice level. And you made a choice. Ashford's jaw tightened. You chose the thing you built over the person who was going to stop you from controlling it, Devin said. And now you're here, with a gun, standing behind a 17-year-old girl. In a building that federal agents are going to be inside of very shortly. He looked directly at Ashford. Is this what the recognition looks like? He said. Is this what you built it for? The gun at Ashford's side, the room, the silence, Brianna watching from the chair, Celeste 3 feet to Devin's left. Completely still, Ashford looked down at the gun in his hand, and what crossed his face was not rage, not defiance. Not the expression of someone who has been pushed into a corner and is preparing to fight out of it. It was exhaustion. The deep, specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding something upright through sheer force of will for longer than he had the capacity for, and has finally here, in this room, at this hour, simply run out. He set the gun on the equipment table beside him. Devin moved before the gun finished settling. 4 steps across the room, he picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket and kept his body between Ashford and Brianna. Ashford didn't resist. He didn't do anything. He just stood there. With his hands at his sides and 15 years of infrastructure and 3 years of nightfall and one very bad decision that had cascaded into this room and this hour, Celeste was already crouching in front of Brianna. She produced a folding knife from her bag and cut the zip ties with 2 clean strokes. Brianna's hands came forward. She rubbed her wrists. Looked at her mother crouching in front of her on the floor of a restricted development lab at 12:30 in the morning. Hi, Brianna said. Celeste looked at her daughter's bruised cheek, reached up, touched it carefully with 2 fingers. Like she was checking that it was real. Like she needed to confirm through touch what her eyes were already telling her. Hi, she said, 2 syllables, carrying everything that hadn't been said between them for 3 years. The distance, the surveillance apps and the security personnel, and every way that fear had expressed itself as control, because fear had no other available language. The divorce and Walter's shooting and 3 years of Brianna believing her mother was one of the people she needed to protect herself from. All of it in 2 words. Hi. Brianna leaned forward. Celeste caught her. Devin turned away. Gave them the moment they had been 3 years arriving at. He took out his phone and called Kendall. The archive transfer, he said. Can you confirm it's active? Keyboard sounds immediately. Kendall had been ready. Give me 45 seconds. Devin waited. Looked at Ashford, who had moved to sit on the edge of the equipment table. Not going anywhere, just sitting. The way a man sits when both the thing he was running toward and the thing he was running from have arrived at the same location simultaneously. Confirmed, Kendall said. Transfer initiated 51 minutes ago. Receiving parties include the Atlanta FBI field office and the DOJ technology division. The data volume is substantial, Devin. Whoever built this archive was very thorough. His name was Walter Vance, Devin said. He built it 3 years ago before someone shot him for finding what he'd found. A pause on the other end. He has a daughter, Devin added. She finished it for him. They secured Ashford to a chair using the zip ties from Brianna's wrists. Devin had never zip-tied a person to a chair before in his life. He added it to the list of things this week had introduced him to without warning or preparation. Kendall arrived through the maintenance tunnel 24 minutes later. He'd been parked a half-mile from the perimeter since 9 o'clock because Devin had called him Wednesday afternoon and told him to position himself near the Hargrove Road facility and be ready to move on short notice. He'd said, ready for what exactly? Devin had said he wasn't certain yet, but probably something that couldn't be planned all the way through. Kendall had said that was his specialty. He came in with his hard-shell equipment case and opened it on the main lab table without being asked and began working immediately, connecting to the facility's internal network, running trace protocols on the transmission architecture. Building from the inside the map he'd been trying to build from photographs and frequency analysis for the past 4 days. From inside it took him 38 minutes. At 1:47 in the morning, Kendall sat back. I have the full network, he said, the hub, all 5 collection points. The complete transmission record. He turned the laptop toward Devin, and something else. What? The network captured everything transmitted near any collection point. Every conversation in Celeste's car for 18 months, every board meeting in the main boardroom, every executive-level discussion in the conference room, he scrolled, and a complete record of Preston Ashford's private calls and conversations in and around his assigned vehicle. He stopped scrolling, including calls to the security firm that received the payments Brianna documented. Brianna looked up from the corner where she'd been sitting with Celeste. The same firm, she said. Same account numbers as your records, Kendall confirmed. The calls were made from the Tahoe, recorded by his own counter-surveillance system. He looked at Ashford across the room. He was monitoring himself. And he captured himself. Ashford said nothing. There's a conversation from 3 years ago, Kendall continued, his voice quieter now. 4 days before Walter Vance was shot. 22 minutes. Clear audio. He paused. It's not ambiguous about what was being arranged. The room was very still. Brianna looked at her mother. Celeste looked at her daughter. Something passed between them that Devin didn't try to read. Something that required no translation and no witness. Send it all to the receiving parties already in the transfer. Devin said. Kendall was already typing. Done. At 2:19 in the morning, Devin stepped outside the room for a moment. Into the development lab. He stood among the equipment and the test stations, and the evidence of what 3 years of unauthorized development looked like when you had the resources and the access, and the expertise and no one watching. He looked at the hardware. His engineer's brain, which had been trying to stay quiet all night, took one long look at what Preston Ashford had built. It was, technically, extraordinary. The directed energy targeting precision alone represented a decade of advancement over publicly known research. The calibration system, the yield modulation, the way the delivery architecture allowed for radius adjustment without fundamental redesign. Remarkable, and completely illegal to develop and distribute outside federal authorization channels, and worth 3 years of someone's life to build. and worth to Ashford's calculation the destruction of Walter Vance to protect. Devin looked at it for one more moment, then he went back inside. The federal agents arrived at 2:58 in the morning. 2 vehicles, 6 agents from the Atlanta FBI field office. They came through the main entrance with Vance Aeronautics facility access that someone with appropriate authority had arranged in the hours since the data transfer began. They were efficient, they were careful. They secured the room and identified everyone present and asked clear questions in the calm tone of people who had been briefed on the drive over and understood what they were walking into. They took Ashford out in handcuffs at 3:14. He walked under his own power, head up, not performing anything, not staging defiance or collapse. Just a man who had reached the end of something and was walking through the door it had deposited him at. Devin watched him go and felt something complicated about it. Not sympathy exactly, not its absence either. Just the recognition of what it looked like when a person ran out of room and had nothing left to do but face what they'd built. A senior agent, a woman in her 40s with the unhurried precision of someone who had handled situations like this enough times to have stopped being surprised by them, asked Devin to walk her through the evening's sequence of events. He did. Accurate, complete, nothing left out. The maintenance tunnel, the lab, the room, Ashford and the gun that was now in an evidence bag. Brianna in the chair. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "The data transfer, the archive, that was initiated by the minor, by Brianna Vance. Yes, her choice. Entirely, the agent wrote something. Looked up. Her father built the dead man's switch 3 years ago, before the shooting. He designed the transfer to initiate automatically when the archive was accessed, so that the documentation would reach federal authorities whether or not he was present to send it himself. And his daughter found the access protocol, in a letter he left for her, in a book he'd given her before the shooting. He knew she'd go back to it eventually." The agent was quiet for a moment. Devin thought about Walter Vance sitting by a window looking at a garden someone had planted for him. About the letter in the weathered envelope that Brianna had read enough times that the creases had gone white. About the careful way a man plans for what comes after him when he understands the risk he's running. "We'll need full statements," the agent said. "From you, from Miss Vance, and from Brianna Vance. Our office tomorrow morning at 10. We'll be there," Devin said. Outside, 4:15 in the morning. The sky was in the stage before light where the darkness admits it's thinking about conceding, but hasn't committed yet. That particular deep blue where the stars are still there, but beginning to look uncertain about their tenure. Devin stood beside his truck, the parking area in front of the facility. Federal vehicles. A second wave of agents who had arrived to begin processing the scene. The ordered, efficient activity of people doing a specific job with specific training. Kendall was packing his equipment into the case. Moving slowly. The careful movements of a man who had been running on adrenaline for 5 hours and could feel what was coming when it stopped. Celeste and Brianna stood nearby, not talking, just standing close. The closeness of two people who had been at a significant distance from each other for a long time and had remembered, here in this parking area before dawn, that proximity was available if they chose it. Brianna said something low. Celeste answered. Devin didn't try to hear it. He leaned against the truck door, looked at his phone. 4:22. Isaiah would be up in 2 hours. He needed to be home before that. He needed to be at the kitchen table when his son came downstairs. That was the priority that had been the priority since the beginning. He called ahead and spoke quietly with Mrs. Patterson, who had a key and who asked no questions at all, and simply said she'd check in on Isaiah if he wasn't back by 6, and Devin thanked her from somewhere that didn't have adequate words. He got in the driver's seat, did not start the engine immediately, just sat. He was tired in a way that went down to the layer of himself that usually didn't report. Not the tired of a hard day's work, the tired of sustained tension and sustained decision-making and sustained management of the fear that he'd kept in its appropriate lane all week, so it didn't run into the other lanes where Isaiah lived. He thought about Walter Vance, about what it meant to build something for someone you might not be there to hand to them. To write a letter and put it in a book and trust that the person who needed it would eventually go back to the page. To design a data transfer that would fire without you if you couldn't fire it yourself. To spend your last days of unimpaired capacity building tools for whoever came after you. He thought about the folder Kendall would find in the archive data. The one with Devin's name on it. He hadn't looked at it yet. There hadn't been time and this hadn't been the place. But it was there. Brianna had seen it in the transfer confirmation. A folder inside the archive, labeled with his name, created by Walter Vance 3 years ago. He would look at it tomorrow. He started the engine, home at 5:07. He went upstairs first, Isaiah's door, slightly open the way it always was when he was sleeping well, even breathing from inside. The stuffed elephant visible in the dim light, tucked under one arm exactly where it always ended up regardless of how the night started. Devin stood in the doorway. He stayed there for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. Just being in the doorway of his son's room at 5 in the morning. Just being the father in the doorway. Just being there. Then he went to the kitchen, made coffee. Real coffee this time, because there was no point pretending he was going to sleep again before 6:30. He sat at the table with the mug and watched the window go from dark to gray to the first tentative consideration of light. He thought about what Ashford had said. For 15 years I made your names mean something. I built the foundation. He thought about his own patents filed at Crestwood and absorbed into company records when the acquisition happened. About 6 months of work that belonged to someone else the moment he filed it. About the conference room and the polite board and the woman in the back row and the box he carried to his car 2 months later. He thought about whether that had broken him the way it had broken Ashford. He decided it hadn't, not because the loss was smaller. It wasn't, not because he was stronger. He wasn't, particularly, because Isaiah had needed him to stay functional, and staying functional for a specific person turned out to be the most reliable way to stay functional at all. Because Renee had looked at him in the hospital and said, "You're going to be okay, Devin," not as a comfort but as a fact she was establishing for him to reference later. Because the alternative to staying upright, collapsing into the injury of being uncredited and undervalued and replaced, and then bereaved. The alternative was becoming the kind of man who justified harm as response to harm. And he had chosen, every morning for 3 years, without fanfare and without an audience, to be a different kind of man. Not a perfect one, not a finished one. Just the kind who showed up. Isaiah appeared in the doorway at 6:21, hair sideways. One eye working, one not yet. He looked at his father at the kitchen table and then at the coffee, and then at his father again. "You didn't sleep," Isaiah said. "A little in the truck?" "No, here." Isaiah climbed onto the kitchen stool, poured his own cereal, added his own milk without asking. He'd been doing that for a year. Devin still noticed every time they sat together in the morning quiet. Then Isaiah said, "Is it over?" Devin looked at his son. Isaiah looked back. The Renee look, patient, already willing to accept whatever the real answer was. "The thing with the company," Isaiah said. "The thing you weren't telling me about?" "Yes," Devin said. "It's over." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Were you scared?" Devin thought about the maintenance tunnel. The dark, the wheel lock resisting under his hands, the door opening into that room, Brianna in the chair, the gun at Ashford's side. "Yes," he said. "But you went anyway." "Yes." Isaiah considered this the way he considered things that were going into the file of things he was building his understanding of the world from. "That's what brave is," he said. "Right? That's what you always say. Not scared. Just going anyway." "That's what I always say," Devin confirmed. "Does it get easier? Going anyway when you're scared?" Devin thought about that honestly. "You get more used to trusting yourself," he said. "That's not the same as easier. But it helps." Isaiah seemed to find this acceptable. He ate his cereal. Devin drank his coffee. Outside the window, the light was properly morning now. The kind that didn't require interpretation. Just clear and present and started. "Dad," Isaiah said. "Yeah, the lady, Brianna." From the flat tire, he stirred his cereal. "Is she okay?" Devin looked at his son. "She's going to be. She did something really hard and she did it well." "What did she do?" "She finished something her father started. Something he couldn't finish himself." Isaiah thought about this. "Like when I had to finish the science project after you hurt your hand?" Devin smiled. He couldn't help it, exactly like that. But considerably higher stakes. "Did it work out?" "Yes," Devin said. "It worked out." Isaiah nodded, satisfied. "Then, can we get the blueberry pancakes this weekend? The real ones, not the mix?" "Yes, you don't know how to make the real ones. I'll learn. Mom knew how, I know she did." Isaiah looked at his cereal, then looked up. "She'd want you to learn." Devin looked at his son for a moment. "She would," he said. "So learn them," Isaiah said it simply. Problem identified, solution proposed, matter settled. 9 years old and already running the kind of clean logic that cut right through to the actual point. Devin looked at his son and felt everything that he always felt looking at his son and said none of it out loud because Isaiah didn't need to hear it out loud. He already knew. That was the thing about showing up every day. About being at the kitchen table when your kid came downstairs. About being in the doorway at 5 in the morning even when you were tired down to the layer that didn't usually report. They learned you. They filed you away. They knew you were going to be there before they checked because you had always been there when they checked. That knowledge, in a child, was not nothing, it was everything. 1 week later, Saturday afternoon, the garage was open but quiet. A good kind of quiet, radio on low. Something from 20 years ago that neither asked anything of you nor required any decisions. The light coming in at the angle that only happened Saturday afternoons in October, when the sun was lower and the shadows were longer and everything looked like it was being held gently. Brianna arrived at 2 o'clock. She texted first this time. She walked in wearing jeans and a sweatshirt and boots that were different from the ones she'd worn before. These had seen actual pavement. Her hair was pulled back simply. She stopped in the middle of the garage and looked around the way she'd looked around the first time. But the cataloging quality was gone. She wasn't assessing. She was just looking, so she said. Automotive maintenance lesson. That's what you're here for, Devin said. I know what I said, but she sat down on the stool he kept near the secondary workbench. I think I also just needed somewhere to be for a while. She looked at him. Is that okay? Pull up a stool, he said. She was already on one. Neither of them acknowledged this. He was working on a brake job. A 2016 Honda that had been waiting since Thursday, because Thursday had not been a normal Thursday. The work was straightforward. The kind that let you talk while your hands did something useful. The kind that gave you permission to look at the car instead of each other when the conversation needed room. The federal review started Monday, Brianna said. I know. 3 board members suspended pending investigation, including Tillman, who Ashford had been monitoring for leverage. A pause. They reinstated my mom as CEO temporarily while it sorts itself out. I heard. She called me to tell me herself. Not a text. She called. Something in her voice that didn't know exactly what to do with the fact it was describing. She said she knew she'd been managing me instead of trusting me. She said she had things to figure out. Devin kept working. I don't know how to do that, Brianna said. Start over with someone when there's already so much between you. You don't start over, Devin said. You start from where you are. With everything that's already there, she was quiet. That's not very comforting, she said. No, he agreed, but it's accurate. She watched him work for a while. Asked a question about the brake assembly, he answered it. She asked another, he showed her. She paid the kind of attention that meant she wanted to understand. Not just to be seen learning. Isaiah came downstairs at 3. He appeared in the doorway between the apartment stairs and the garage, looked at Brianna, looked at his father, and looked back at Brianna. You're the flat tire girl, he said. That's me, Brianna said. My dad talks about you, Isaiah, Devin said. What, he does? Isaiah climbed onto the second stool. He doesn't say what about, but he gets the thinking face. Brianna looked at Devin. The thinking face. There is no thinking face, Devin said. It's like this, Isaiah demonstrated. Brow pulled, eyes slightly out of focus, jaw set. The impression was alarmingly precise. Brianna laughed, not a polite laugh, not a performed laugh. A real one surprised out of her, unguarded, the kind that happened before you decided to let it happen. Isaiah looked deeply satisfied with himself. I like her, he told his father. I can hear you, Brianna said. I know, Isaiah said. That was for you too. At 4:30 Celeste arrived. She parked on the street, walked to the garage door. She was wearing dark slacks and a blazer that was less formal than any blazer Devin had previously seen on her. Her hair was down. She stood in the doorway and her eyes went directly to Brianna and stayed there. Brianna looked up. They looked at each other across the garage. A lot of history between them. 3 years of it accumulated into distance and suspicion, and love being expressed as surveillance, because the fear of losing someone else hadn't found a better language yet. The divorce and Walter and everything after Walter, all of it present in the space between them, but also a room south of Atlanta at 12:30 in the morning, a folding knife cutting zip ties with 2 clean strokes, a hand catching a daughter who was finally leaning in. Hi. Hi, I was in the neighborhood, Celeste said. Nobody is in this neighborhood, Brianna said. I brought food, if that's acceptable. She held up a bag. Devin looked at her standing in the door of his garage, with a bag of food and her hair down, and the expression of a woman who had built a company from nothing, and been outmaneuvered from within and been handed her daughter back by a mechanic she'd hired under false pretenses, and who was now standing in that mechanic's garage on a Saturday afternoon, not entirely certain of her next move. It was the most human he'd ever seen her look, and it suited her better than the Forbes covers. Kitchen's upstairs, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. 2 words with a longer sentence inside them. He nodded. Isaiah was already off his stool. Is there enough for 4? Because we were going to have cereal and that bag smells significantly better than cereal. Celeste looked down at him. More than enough for 4. Good. Isaiah looked at his father with the satisfaction of someone whose outcome preferences had been confirmed. I like her too, he said. Devin shook his head. But he was smiling, and that evening, after dinner at the kitchen table where Isaiah demonstrated his multiplication speed for Brianna, who was genuinely and not performatively impressed, and after Celeste sat in his kitchen and drank coffee that was better than what she was used to having in her glass-walled sitting room, and after Brianna and Isaiah had a detailed debate about whether second alternate on a math team was technically on the math team or adjacent to it. After all of that, after they were gone, Devin sat at his workbench. He opened his laptop. He opened the archive data that Kendall had forwarded to him that morning. Organized, labeled, complete. He navigated through the folder structure until he found it. Devin Holloway, Crestwood Engineering. He opened it. Inside was a document. 42 pages. Technical. Dense. Written in the language of someone who understood electromagnetic systems at a fundamental level and assumed the reader did too. A complete technical breakdown of Project Nightfall. Every component, every design decision, every specification, written not for a prosecutor or a journalist, but for an engineer. For someone who could read it and understand not just what had been built, but how and why and what it would take to counter it. And at the top of the first page, above the technical content, a short paragraph handwritten. Photographed and embedded in the document. Devin, if you're reading this, it means the system worked the way I designed it, and you're the person I believed you'd be when I chose you. I've been following your work since Crestwood. The shielding research, the patents, the work you did on directed energy countermeasures before the acquisition. You understand what Nightfall is better than most people with the clearance to know about it, and you're not on anyone's payroll. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this myself. I'm sorry my daughter has been carrying it. She's stronger than I had the right to ask her to be. What you're holding is everything you need. I trusted you with it. W. Vance. Devin read it twice, sat back, looked at the garage around him, at the workbench where he'd built and rebuilt things for 3 years, at the photograph of Isaiah with the fish too small to keep, at the tools in their order, because order was something you could always give yourself. He thought about Walter Vance sitting by a window in Decatur, watching a garden he'd been given to look at. About a man who'd planned for what came after him with the same precision he'd applied to everything else in his life. Who'd written a letter and put it in a book and designed a data transfer and created a document for a man he'd never met and trusted that the man would be there when the moment came. He thought about what it meant to leave something for someone you couldn't hand it to yourself. He thought about Renee, about the way she'd looked at him in the hospital and said, "You're going to be okay, Devin." The certainty in it. The way she'd said it like she was establishing a fact he could borrow against for later. Like she was building something for him to find when he needed it. He thought about Isaiah downstairs, about the note that would be on the refrigerator tomorrow morning. The one that would say something in red marker pressed too hard and circled more times than necessary. Whatever the next big thing was. Whatever Isaiah had decided required the world's full attention. He thought about blueberry pancakes. About learning to make the real ones. About doing it imperfectly the first time and then doing it again. He closed the laptop, took out his engineering notebook, opened to the last page he'd written on. He turned to a fresh page. Picked up his pencil, always the pencil first always, and wrote at the top, "What comes next?" He stayed there for a while, not writing. Just sitting with the question and the quiet and the weight of a week that had moved like a year, and cost things he hadn't known he still had to spend and given back things he hadn't known he'd lost. Then he wrote 2 lines, not for himself, not for anyone specific. Just because they were true and true things were worth writing down. The work you do when nobody's watching. The person you stay when the cost gets high. He looked at what he'd written, put the pencil down, closed the notebook, went to bed, did not lie awake for the first time in a week, the first time in longer than that. He just slept. And in the morning Isaiah was already downstairs, cereal poured, juice in the glass, not the coffee, the radio onto something he'd found himself. And on the refrigerator below the math team announcement with its 3 red circles, a new note in the familiar red marker, letters, press too hard. Exactly 2 lines, Dow Dad, I made pancakes, they're not good. But I tried. Devin stood at the top of the stairs. Write it once, write it again. Then he went down to eat the pancakes.